The worn-out soles of Clara's black flats whispered against the polished marble floor, a sound only she could hear beneath the symphony of clinking silverware and muted conversations. Each whisper was a countdown to the end of her double shift, to the moment she could peel off her starched apron, and to the sweet relief of kicking off the shoes that had become tiny prisons for her feet. More than anything, it was a countdown to seeing her son, Leo. His 7-year-old face, framed by a messy mop of brown hair, was the fuel that propelled her through the 16-hour days at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that prided itself on an ambiance of affordable luxury, a promise as thin as the gold leaf on its overpriced desserts. Clara was good at her job, not just proficient, but genuinely good. She had a way of anticipating a diner's needs before they even reached for the salt shaker. She could navigate a crowded floor with a tray full of champagne flutes with the grace of a dancer, her smile a small constant beacon in the dim, honeyed light of the dining room. She remembered the regulars, how Mr. Henderson liked his steak, charred on the outside and rare within, how Mrs. Gable preferred her water without ice, even in the sweltering heat of July. These small acts of remembering were her specialty, the little threads of human connection she wove into the transactional fabric of her work. But her skill was a double-edged sword, for it drew the unwanted attention of her manager, Adrian Sterling. Mr. Sterling was a man who wore his authority like an ill-fitting suit, tight, constricting, and prone to splitting at the seams under the slightest pressure. He was a man of medium height and diminishing hair who compensated for his lack of physical presence with a voice that could curdle cream. He patrolled the restaurant floor not like a manager, but like a predator, his eyes scanning for the slightest infraction. A misplaced fork, a water glass less than 3/4 full, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. And his favorite prey was Clara. Perhaps it was her quiet competence that irritated him, a reminder of a professional grace he could never possess. Or perhaps it was her resilience, the way she absorbed his clipped criticisms and passive-aggressive remarks without breaking. "Clara," he would hiss, his voice a low thrum of displeasure as he cornered her near the kitchen doors. "Table 7. The gentleman's wine glass has been empty for a full 90 seconds. Are we running a charity for the thirsty tonight?" He never raised his voice to a yell. He didn't need to. His genius was in the art of public humiliation, delivered with a smug, reptilian smile that made the insult sting far worse than any shout. Clara would simply nod, murmur, "Right away, Mr. Sterling," and glide back to the table, her face a mask of professional calm. Inside, however, a familiar knot of acid would tighten in her stomach. She needed this job. It wasn't a career path, it was a lifeline. Leo's father had been a ghost in their lives long before he vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but a stack of bills and a hole in their small world. The tips she earned at the Gilded Spoon paid for Leo's after-school care, for the asthma inhaler he sometimes needed, for the second-hand Lego sets she'd buy him as a treat. So she swallowed Mr. Sterling's venom, digested the injustice, and converted it into the energy she needed to keep going. That evening, the restaurant was buzzing with the low hum of a busy Tuesday. Clara was in her element, a blur of efficient motion. She had just finished taking an order from a quiet man at a small table in the corner, a man who had been in a few times before. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans that seemed out of place amidst the blazers and cocktail dresses. He had a kind, weary face and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He always ordered the same thing, the pan-seared salmon, and he always read a worn paperback while he ate. Clara treated him with the same attentive courtesy she gave the boisterous party of executives at the central table. She refilled his water, asked if the salmon was to his liking, and left him to his book. He always met her eyes when he thanked her, a simple, genuine connection that was a rare gift in her line of work. Mr. Sterling, on one of his prowls, had noticed her attention. "Don't waste your best service on the window shoppers, Clara," he'd sneered under his breath. "He's probably going to tip you in loose change. Focus on the real clientele." Clara ignored him, her focus already on her next task, but as she turned towards the kitchen, she saw them enter. Mr. Sterling's posture immediately changed. He straightened his tie, puffed out his chest, and plastered on a smile so wide it looked painful. It was Mrs. Eleanor Davenport and her husband, a local real estate mogul with a face like a clenched fist. Mrs. Davenport was a woman sculpted from vanity and entitlement, draped in designer fabrics and dripping with jewels that caught the light and threw tiny, arrogant sparks around the room. She was, more importantly, a close friend of Mr. Sterling's wife. Her arrival meant the evening was about to get significantly more difficult. "Clara," Sterling barked, his voice suddenly loud and performative, "you will be taking care of the Davenports this evening. Do not disappoint me." The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Clara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and walked towards the table, her professional smile feeling more like a shield than ever before. The man in the corner, Julian Croft, lowered his book slightly. He had seen the shift in the room's atmosphere the moment the Davenports had entered. He'd seen it in the way the manager, Sterling, had transformed from a petty tyrant into a fawning sycophant. He'd seen it in the subtle tensing of the waitress's shoulders, the woman named Clara who had been so kind and professional. Julian had a knack for observing these small dynamics. It was, in fact, his business. The Gilded Spoon was one of over 100 restaurants in his portfolio, a sprawling hospitality empire he had built from a single diner he'd inherited from his father. He rarely visited his establishments announced. He preferred to come in like this, a ghost in his own machine, to feel the real pulse of the place. He wanted to know if the salmon was consistently good, if the floors were clean, and most importantly, if his staff were treated with dignity. The Gilded Spoon, from what he'd gathered over his last 3 visits, had a problem. And that problem had a name: Adrian Sterling. Julian had already flagged the branch for its unusually high staff turnover rate, and a handful of anonymous complaints filed with corporate, all citing a manager who created a toxic work environment. Seeing Sterling in action was confirming his worst suspicions. He watched as Clara approached the Davenports' table. Her demeanor was flawless. She was poised, her voice calm and welcoming. But Mrs. Davenport was immediately on the offensive. She waved a dismissive hand at the wine list. "Just bring me your most expensive Chardonnay and make sure it's properly chilled. The last time we were here, it was practically lukewarm." Her voice was a sharp, nasal whine that cut through the restaurant's gentle murmur. Clara simply smiled. "Of course, madam. An excellent choice." Julian saw the flicker of admiration in Mr. Davenport's eyes as he watched Clara, a look that did not go unnoticed by his wife. Her lips thinned into a venomous line. From that moment on, she seemed determined to find fault in everything Clara did. The bread wasn't warm enough. The butter was too hard. The ambient music was distracting. With each complaint, Clara remained unflappable, responding with patient apologies and swift solutions. She was a master of de-escalation, a diplomat in a black apron. Mr. Sterling hovered nearby, his anxiety palpable. He darted to the table between courses, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Eleanor? Is this young woman taking good care of you?" His questions were aimed at the Davenports, but his glare was fixed on Clara. He was a conductor trying to orchestrate a perfect performance, and Clara was his first violin, expected to play every note flawlessly under immense pressure. Julian felt a slow burn of anger in his chest. He recognized Sterling's type all too well. They were the rot that could fester in the core of a company, poisoning morale and driving away good people. People like Clara. He had seen her kindness firsthand. During his first visit, he had accidentally left his reading glasses behind. He'd called the restaurant an hour later, expecting them to be lost forever. But Clara had answered. "Oh yes, sir," she had said, her voice warm and reassuring. "I found them and put them aside for you. I noticed you were reading and thought you might need them." When he'd returned, she had them waiting for him in a small, clean pouch. It was a small thing, a tiny detail, but it spoke volumes about her character. She wasn't just serving food, she was caring for people. The main courses arrived. Clara placed the plates with practiced ease, her movements fluid and economical. Mr. Davenport had the ribeye, and Mrs. Davenport a delicate sea bass. As Clara leaned in to refill Mrs. Davenport's water glass, Mr. Davenport chose that exact moment to gesture expansively while telling a story. His elbow bumped Clara's arm. It was a slight nudge, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. A single tiny droplet of water escaped the pitcher and landed on the sleeve of Mrs. Davenport's silk blouse. It was a drop, not a splash, not a spill, a single glistening bead of water on a field of emerald green silk. A gasp, sharp and theatrical, tore through the air. Mrs. Davenport stared at her sleeve as if she had been struck by a viper. "My God, look what you've done!" she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and volume, deliberately drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "This is a custom-made blouse. It's ruined. You clumsy, incompetent girl." The restaurant fell silent. Diners paused, forks halfway to their mouths. All eyes turned to the unfolding drama. Mr. Davenport looked embarrassed, opening his mouth to explain, but his wife shot him a look that could freeze fire. He fell silent. Clara's face went pale. "Madam, I am so terribly sorry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "It was just a drop of water. It will dry without a trace, I assure you." "Without a trace," Mrs. Davenport scoffed, standing up for dramatic effect. "Do you have any idea what this fabric is? Water staining is a permanent issue. This blouse cost more than you make in a month." The cruelty of the remark hung in the air, thick and foul. Julian felt his hands clench into fists beneath the table. He watched Clara, saw the flush of shame creep up her neck, the way her eyes darted around at the sea of staring faces. She was cornered, exposed, and utterly alone. And then he saw Sterling begin to move toward the table, his face a mask of thunderous rage. The storm had not just gathered, it had broken. Adrian Sterling descended upon the table like a vulture spotting carrion. This was not a problem to be solved, it was an opportunity to be seized. An opportunity to perform his loyalty to the Davenports and to finally, definitively, break the spirit of the waitress who annoyed him with her quiet dignity. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice echoing with manufactured outrage. He didn't even look at Clara. His full attention was on Mrs. Davenport, his expression a carefully crafted mixture of horror and sympathy. "Eleanor, I am mortified, absolutely mortified. That this should happen in my establishment is unacceptable." "It's more than unacceptable, Adrian," Mrs. Davenport said, pressing a hand to her chest as if wounded. "It's a disgrace. Your staff is utterly unprofessional." "I will handle this immediately," Sterling vowed. He finally turned to Clara, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, venomous triumph. "You," he spat, the word a projectile, "you have not only damaged a valuable piece of clothing, you have embarrassed this restaurant. You have embarrassed me." Clara stood frozen, the heavy glass water pitcher still in her hand. Her mind was racing. It was an accident. It was Mr. Davenport's elbow. It was just water. But she knew with a sickening certainty that none of those facts mattered. The truth was irrelevant in the face of Sterling's ambition and Mrs. Davenport's malice. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize sincerely to Mrs. Davenport," Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. "It was an accident. I can take the blouse to be professionally cleaned at my own expense." "Cleaned?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think a simple cleaning can undo this level of incompetence? You have insulted one of our most valued patrons." He was playing to the crowd now, his voice rising. The other diners were no longer just watching. They were a captive audience to his cruel theater. He was making an example of her. I don't know what else I can do," Clara whispered, her composure beginning to crack. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. All she could think about was Leo. If she lost this job, how would she pay the rent next month? The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through her. Sterling saw the fear in her eyes and leaned in for the kill. "An apology is not enough," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, sinister hiss that was somehow more chilling than his shouting. "Words are cheap. You need to show Mrs. Davenport that you understand the gravity of your mistake. You need to show her genuine remorse." Clara stared at him, confused. "Show her?" "Yes," Sterling said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. He savored the moment, drawing it out, letting the silence stretch and tighten. "I want you to get down on your knees and beg for her forgiveness." The words landed like stones in the silent dining room. A collective quiet gasp rippled through the onlookers. Even Mrs. Davenport looked momentarily surprised, though a flicker of pleased cruelty quickly replaced it. This was better than she could have hoped for. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" she breathed, the word barely audible. "You heard me," Sterling said, his voice hard as iron. "On your knees, right here, right now. You will apologize for your clumsiness and beg Mrs. Davenport to find it in her heart to forgive you. Or you can collect your things and never set foot in the Gilded Spoon again." It was an impossible choice, a choice between her dignity and her son's well-being. The two things she valued most in the world pitted against each other. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a friendly face, for some sign of support. She saw only pity, discomfort, and morbid curiosity. The other waiters and waitresses stood frozen at their stations, their faces pale with fear. They knew that her fate could easily be theirs. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, hot and stinging. She thought of Leo's laughter, of the way he snuggled into her side when she read him a bedtime story. She thought of the overdue electricity bill sitting on her kitchen counter. The weight of it all was crushing. Her pride, which had been her armor for so long, felt like a fragile, useless thing. What good was pride if her son went hungry? Slowly, shakily, she set the water pitcher down on a nearby serving stand. Her movements were stiff, robotic. The entire world had narrowed to the space between her and the cold marble floor. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, feel their judgment and their pity burning her skin. She took a shuddering breath, the air catching in her throat like a sob. Her body felt disconnected from her mind as she willed her legs to bend. The fabric of her black trousers tightened across her thigh as she lowered herself, the first knee beginning its slow, agonizing descent toward the ground. The shame was a physical taste in her mouth, bitter as bile. In the corner, Julian Croft felt a cold, precise rage settle over him. He had seen enough. He had seen bullying and mismanagement in his time, but this was a different level of depravity. This was not about maintaining standards, it was about the gleeful exercise of power, the sadistic pleasure of stripping a person of their humanity for sport. Sterling wasn't just firing an employee, he was trying to shatter her. As Clara's knee hovered an inch from the floor, a single tear tracing a path through her faint makeup, a voice cut through the suffocating silence. "That's enough." The voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority that made every head turn. It came from the corner table, from the unassuming man in the dark sweater. Julian Croft stood up. He placed his paperback book neatly on the table, aligning it with the edge. The simple, deliberate action was mesmerizing in its calmness. He looked first at Clara, his eyes offering a silent message of support. Then he turned his gaze to Adrian Sterling. Sterling, annoyed at the interruption, scowled. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private staff matter. Please return to your meal." Julian took a slow step forward. "I don't think I will," he said, his voice still level, but now with an undercurrent of steel. "Because what you're doing is not a staff matter. It's a public display of cruelty, and it's happening in my restaurant." A nervous titter went through the room. Sterling's face contorted in disbelief, then amusement. "Your restaurant?" he scoffed, looking Julian up and down, taking in the simple sweater and worn jeans. "I think you're mistaken. I am the manager of the Gilded Spoon. Now, if you don't sit down, I'll have you removed for disturbing the peace." Julian ignored him completely. He walked past the manager and stood directly in front of the still crouching Clara. He extended a hand to her. "Please, stand up," he said gently. "You have nothing to apologize for." Hesitantly, as if waking from a nightmare, Clara looked at his outstretched hand. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the same kindness she had seen when she returned his glasses. With a trembling hand, she placed her own in his, and he helped her to her feet. The simple act of human decency was so profound in that moment that she almost burst into tears again, but this time from relief. Sterling's face was turning a blotchy, furious red. "Who in the hell do you think you are? Security!" he yelled, craning his neck towards the front door. "Get this man out of here." "That won't be necessary, Adrian," Julian said, finally turning his full attention back to the manager. He used his first name, and the casual familiarity of it seemed to stun Sterling into silence. "My name is Julian Croft." The name meant nothing to the diners. But to Adrian Sterling, it was like a lightning strike. He had seen the name on corporate letterheads, at the bottom of memos, on the signature line of the very contract he had signed. Julian Croft, the founder, the CEO, the owner of everything. Sterling's jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the man in the simple sweater to Mrs. Davenport, who was staring, aghast, and back again. Mr. Croft, he stammered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. I didn't recognize you. I had no idea. That's the point, Adrian, Julian said, his voice dropping, becoming lethally quiet. You're not supposed to need to know who I am to treat people with basic human decency. You're supposed to do it because it's the right thing to do. You're supposed to do it because the people who work for you are human beings, not props in your pathetic power plays. He took another step closer, and Sterling involuntarily took a step back. I've been watching you, Adrian. I've read the exit interviews. I've seen the turnover rates. I've seen how you treat your staff when you think no one of consequence is looking. You're a bully and a coward. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Sterling's authority piece by piece in front of the very audience he had tried to command. Then Julian turned his cool gaze on Mrs. Davenport, who was now trying to shrink into her chair. And you, Mrs. Davenport, he said, I believe you've forgotten the incident at our Park Avenue location last year. The ruined cashmere coat that security footage showed you'd spilled your own wine on. My company chose not to press charges for attempted fraud then. Perhaps that was a mistake. Mrs. Davenport's face went from indignant to horrified. She grabbed her purse and her husband's arm, muttering, "We're leaving," before practically fleeing the restaurant without a backward glance. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of the Davenports' hasty retreat. Sterling stood alone, exposed and stripped of his allies, his face a mask of pure terror. The intervention was complete. Now the reckoning would begin. The silence that followed the Davenports' departure was thick and heavy, charged with anticipation. Adrian Sterling looked like a man who had just watched his own life fall off a cliff. His face was slick with a cold sweat. His arrogant posture had collapsed into a defeated slump, as if his spine had dissolved. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a fish gasping for air in a polluted pond of his own making. Julian Croft let the silence hang for a beat longer, allowing the full weight of the situation to settle on Sterling. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't causing a scene. His takedown was surgical, precise, and all the more devastating for its control. Let's talk about standards, Adrian, Julian began, his voice a low conversational hum that was somehow more intimidating than any yell. You seem to be a big believer in standards. So let's review yours. Your standard is to create an environment of fear, not respect. Your standard is to pander to the wealthy and abuse the vulnerable. Your standard is to humiliate a dedicated employee in front of a room full of strangers over a single drop of water. He gestured around the room. These people, he said, indicating the other staff members who were watching, wide-eyed from the sidelines, are the lifeblood of this company. Their hard work, their dedication, their ability to smile through 16-hour shifts. That's what makes a restaurant successful. Not managers who get a cheap thrill from breaking people's spirits. Sterling finally found his voice, a desperate, wheezing thing. Mr. Croft, please. It was a performance. For Eleanor. You know how these people are. One must manage their expectations. It was a show, that's all. A misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Julian's eyebrow arched, a small movement that was terrifying in its skepticism. Let me read you something, Adrian. It's from an HR file. An exit interview dated March 14th. Quote, Mr. Sterling docked my pay for a broken glass that a customer knocked over. He told me it was my responsibility to have better environmental awareness. I had to choose between buying groceries or paying my full phone bill that week. Does that sound like a misunderstanding? Or how about this one, from May 2nd? Mr. Sterling routinely changes the schedule with less than 12 hours' notice and then writes people up for being late. He seems to enjoy watching us scramble. Tell me, Adrian, was that part of the show too? Sterling flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on Maria, the young hostess near the door, whose face was pale but resolute. The pieces clicked into place in his panicked mind. The leak, the source. He hissed at her, but Julian stepped between them, a silent, immovable wall. Don't you dare! Julian's voice was now laced with ice. Don't you dare try to deflect your failure onto the people who had the courage to speak up against you. I have a standard too, Adrian. My standard is that every single person who works for me, from the dishwasher to the executive chef, is treated with dignity. My standard is that managers are leaders, not tyrants. They are there to support their team, to build them up, not to tear them down for sport. And by that standard, Adrian, you are an abject failure. My wife, Sterling pleaded, his last pathetic gambit. She'll be devastated. Her social standing. You want to talk about devastation? Julian's voice was sharp. Let's talk about Clara, a woman who likely works more hours in a week than you do in 2, for a fraction of your salary. A woman who deals with demanding customers and does it with a grace you couldn't possibly comprehend. A woman who was about to sacrifice her own dignity, not because she was wrong, but because she was afraid of losing the job she needs to support her family. That is devastation. Your wife's social calendar is a consequence of your professional actions. You built this disaster yourself, Adrian. The public nature of the dressing down was the point. It wasn't just about firing Sterling, it was about cleansing the toxic culture he had created. Julian turned slightly, his voice rising just enough to be clearly heard by every employee in the room. This, he said, gesturing to the cowering Sterling, is not leadership. This is not strength. This behavior will never be tolerated in any of my establishments again. Your well-being matters more than the ego of any one manager. It was a proclamation, a new declaration of independence for the staff of the Gilded Spoon. A few of the kitchen staff, who had peeked out through the doors, exchanged looks of dawning hope. Finally, Julian turned back to Sterling for the final blow. Your employment with Croft Hospitality is terminated, effective immediately. You can't, Sterling whispered, his voice cracking. I can, and I have, Julian stated flatly. There is a gentleman at the front door. He's from my corporate security team. He will escort you to your office while you collect your personal belongings. You will then be escorted off the premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. It was a complete and utter professional execution. Without another word, Sterling turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and began the long, shameful walk toward the front of the restaurant. As he passed the staff, he couldn't meet their eyes. He saw not fear, but a cool, quiet contempt. He was no longer the predator. He was just a pathetic, powerless man. Julian watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the rest of the dining room. To our guests, he said, his voice returning to a calm, professional tone. I sincerely apologize for this disruption to your evening. There will be no charge for any of your meals tonight. Please, enjoy the rest of your dinner on us. A murmur of stunned appreciation went through the room. The tension broke. Amidst it all, Clara stood motionless, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Julian Croft, the man who had not only saved her from humiliation, but had vindicated her in a way she had never dreamed possible. He met her gaze, and for the first time that night, a small, weary smile touched his lips. The storm had passed. With the restaurant slowly emptying, Julian walked over to Clara. She was still standing by the serving station, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Are you all right? He asked again, his voice gentle. Clara could only nod, the words caught in her throat. Thank you, she finally whispered, the two words feeling hopelessly inadequate. I'm the one who should be apologizing to you, Julian said firmly, for letting a man like that represent my company for so long. He gestured to the Davenport's empty table. Please, sit down for a minute. Hesitantly, Clara sat. The chair felt strange, a place she was never meant to occupy. Julian pulled up a chair opposite her. Maria, the hostess, approached them cautiously, her eyes shining. Mr. Croft? Maria, Julian said warmly. Thank you. What you did took incredible courage. You should be very proud. He looked at Clara. This wasn't a random visit. Tonight just accelerated the timeline. I've been building a case against Adrian for 3 months. Maria reached out to my personal office after Sterling fired her friend for being 2 minutes late. She documented everything. My visits here were to corroborate her story. I was waiting for one final public act to terminate his contract with Cause, voiding his severance clause. Tonight, he provided it. And you, Clara. I saw how you handled my reading glasses that first night. That's not in any training manual, that's character. I invest in character. The revelation was staggering. This wasn't a chance encounter, it was the final move in a calculated game. She hadn't just been saved, she had been the tipping point. I have a problem now, Julian said, a thoughtful look on his face. My restaurant is without a manager. Clara's stomach clenched. Are you closing down? Closing? He looked genuinely surprised. No, I'm promoting. He looked directly into her eyes. I've seen your work ethic. I've seen your integrity. I read your file, perfect attendance, glowing remarks from every colleague who was ever asked. You are the exact opposite of him. I want you to be the new general manager of the Gilded Spoon. The statement was so absurd that Clara almost laughed. Me? She squeaked. Mr. Croft, I can't. I'm a waitress. I have no experience in management. You manage 16 hours on your feet with a perfect smile, he countered. You manage to remember a dozen complex orders while de-escalating a tense situation. You manage to treat a man you think is a nobody with the same grace you give a table of executives. Clara, I'm not asking you to be Adrian Sterling. I'm asking you to be Clara. Run this place like you run your section, with empathy, efficiency, and an eye for the little details that make people feel seen. The paperwork, the spreadsheets, that's just details. We can teach you details. We can't teach character. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple keychain. He slid the 2 keys across the table. These are the master keys. I'm offering you a salary that's triple what you're making now, full medical and dental for you and your son, and a performance-based profit share. All I ask is that you run this place with the same heart you've always shown. Tears streamed down her face, tears of shock and overwhelming relief. Slowly, her trembling fingers closed around the keys. They were cool and solid in her palm. The weight of them was real. As the last diners left, the staff gathered. Marco, the head chef, a large man with forearms covered in faded tattoos, came out first, wiping his hands on his apron. It's about damn time, he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. We all saw it, Clara. You took his poison so the rest of us wouldn't have to. You've been the real leader here for years. Congratulations, boss. The word boss sent a jolt through her. Soon the others joined, a small crowd of waiters and busboys, patting her on the back, shaking her hand, their faces etched with a profound shared relief. They weren't just congratulating her, they were celebrating their collective liberation. Julian stayed until the restaurant was empty. He asked Clara about Leo, smiling as she described his love for Lego spaceships. When he finally left, he paused at the door. Take tomorrow off, Clara. Spend the day with Leo. That's your first official order as manager. He smiled. From one parent to another. Clara stood alone in the vast, silent dining room. The air, which moments ago had been thick with tension, now felt light and clean. She walked to the manager's office, her office, and pushed the door open. It smelled of Sterling's cheap cologne and stale ambition. On the desk was a meticulously typed memo detailing a new demerit system for tardiness and inefficiency. She ripped it to shreds and let the pieces fall like confetti into the wastebasket. She found his personal planner, a list of names under performance review. Her name was at the top with the note, Insubordinate Attitude, Final Warning. She closed the book with a definitive snap. Her first phone call was to the young man Sterling had fired just before Christmas for taking a sick day. She offered him his job back, starting next week. He accepted, his voice choked with gratitude. She opened a window, letting the cool night air rush in, clearing out the old regime. Later, as she locked the front door, the solid click of the lock echoed in the empty street. It was the sound of a chapter ending. Walking to the bus stop, she felt the cool metal of the keys in her pocket, a comforting solid weight against her leg. The worn-out flats on her feet no longer felt like prisons. They were just shoes that had carried her through the hardest day of her life and delivered her to the first day of a new one. She looked up at the moon, a silver coin in the dark sky, and thought of Leo. Tomorrow she wouldn't just tell him a bedtime story, she would tell him a true one, about a dragon that was vanquished and a quiet waitress who discovered she was a queen, holding the keys to her very own kingdom.